please help me in welcoming Cami to the stage.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Nashville. Great little town. So I'm going to just get into it. How's my... Good? We're good? Okay. First impressions here. Good answer. But I want to tell you a story here. During the 1980s, the owner of A&W launched a campaign. And some of you might already have heard of it. Third is the word. A new third pound burger to compete with McDonald's Quarter Pounder. Even though it offered more meat for the same price as McDonald's and was purportedly better tasting, it did not sell. Because what people didn't understand is fractions. Math literacy. They thought 4 is bigger than 3. Why would I buy the 3 and not the 4? Like, this makes no sense. So we could chalk this up to math literacy, like we sometimes say there's a lack of scientific literacy, but there's other signals that happen that filter how we see information. Anyway, but today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about mis and disinformation, and this is where part of the agenda where I say, now for something a little different. Disinformation and misinformation in agriculture really aren't new. I mean, we know that. We've been dealing with the constant drumbeat of it for decades, but how disinformation is driven, incentivized, and shared today has changed over the last few years. And I probably can't really enlighten you regarding the damage that it has done for agriculture, the industry, for societies, public health, farming, and food production, across the board. You already know all this, but I guess my hope today is I can frame mis and disinformation in a different light, maybe provide some insights on how it impacts agriculture, food, and public health, and maybe inspire some discussion on how we can think about it, how we can mitigate it, and how we can maybe manage it better. All right. A little bit about myself. I often refer to myself as a daughter of the prairies. I was born and raised in Western Canada, Saskatchewan. Woo! Yeah, thank you. My parents didn't farm, but our extended families did. And I grew up in a small farming community where you couldn't swing a cat in the fall or the spring without, in the classroom where half the desks were empty, right? That's just what we lived on. I'm a mom, I'm a grandma. I like to think of myself as a bit of a storyteller. The jury's still out on that. But I joined Legacy Monsanto in 2014 as social sciences lead after working several years as a public sector researcher through the University of Saskatchewan and the University of Calgary. I have a bachelor's degree in biotech management and marketing and a PhD in interdisciplinary studies. Because I couldn't pick, I picked 3. A blend of ag economics, business psychology, and sociology. So it was a fun ride. And I am a social scientist. And you might go, well, wait, what's a social scientist? And why is a social scientist working at Bayer? Well, social science is really an umbrella term for, it covers a number of disciplines in the liberal arts and the humanities, sociology, economics, law, communication, linguistics, rhetoric, across the board. But no matter what discipline you're in as a social scientist, all of us social scientists have one thing in common. We're interested in relationships. We're interested in relationships between people, between people and organizations. We're interested in things, and specifically me, in the relationship between science and society, especially as it relates to agriculture. My job with Bayer, with Monsanto previously with Bayer, is the first of its kind in the industry. I don't see another role like it out there. So I kind of think that I've got a really interesting job. And what I bring to the table is really a different skill set that really helps my organization understand that evolving complex relationship between science and society. So I guess if I have to distill my elevator speech down to 2 floors, it's probably this: science thinks and the public feels. So I try to figure out what's going on in the gap of that. So this is the outline for today's presentation, and I'm going to kind of run through these things. I think we need to understand the disinformation landscape. I'm going to put some definitions out there so we can distinguish what things are, because sometimes things get muddled. I want to talk a lot about the human condition, because human behavior is very interesting. And then I want to share a GMO case study that a group of some co-authors and I put together and published in 2020. I won't dive into the nitty-gritty of the data, but I'll tell you what messages we got from it, and it's basically a case study on GMOs, which I think you'll find interesting. And then why should we care, and what can we do moving forward? So I hope this stimulates some discussion for us. So several weeks ago, I put a message out on Ag Twitter, and I asked all my farming colleagues a question: what is your quote-unquote favorite piece of misinformation about ag? And this is just some of what I got back. And you know, you've probably heard all this before, although I must say, chicken's wings grow back was a bit, I didn't know that one. That was, yeah, apparently some people believe that. I like the farmers are rich one. My husband loves the straw is hay one. Like, you know, this is kind of what we expect to see on there. But I also got some images too. Images are always interesting. They represent maybe some idyllic perceptions of farms and farmers, but there's also scary depictions too. You know, about technology, about production practices. And these are colorful, creative images, and unlike 20 years ago when we may have only seen these images once a day, they are sweeping across our social media feeds and the internet multiple times a day. These images, these words, these misplaced ideas can really become permanently affixed in our brain matter. They stick, and they become enduring. And this leads to misguided social consensus about how we do the work that we do in agriculture. But I'm getting ahead of myself, so I want to start with some definitions. Oh, but before that, I slipped this slide in here because I thought what better way to demonstrate how misinformation rolls is with different headlines. And because we were talking about fertilizers today, I just kind of cherry-picked some of these things. But a 2018 study found that 70% of people actually never read more than the headline of any kind of article before commenting and sharing. And earlier this year, another study found that 59% of links shared on social media have never actually been clicked. So people just share the headlines. And we know how headlines can look sometimes, right? So people, or bots, or whatever, just read the headline and share without reading a single word of the text. This is a problem for us. And I mean, media knows this, and they feed right into this with the headlines. But let's start with some definitions. Is it misinformation or is it disinformation? These terms are often used interchangeably, but they're different. Misinformation is referred to as inaccurate information or incomplete information. And disinformation is a little bit different. But misinformation, misinformation misleads through an honest mistake, negligence, or unconscious bias. We don't mean to share it. Disinformation is different. It is qualitatively different, and in the literature is defined as a product of a carefully planned and technologically sophisticated deceit process. So the main difference between misinformation and disinformation is intent. So today I'm going to talk more about disinformation because I think that that's targeted and strategic on the part of those that create and share it. And I think it's meant to mislead people purposely. And I think that that's probably the greatest risk we face in this industry. But part of understanding misinformation and disinformation is understanding how they interact with one another. There are interdependencies. For example, a piece of purposeful disinformation can be shared as misinformation by someone through lack of knowledge or negligence, because, you know, we don't know. We don't know. I've done it. We've all done it. Further amplification of disinformation in this way is not purposefully deceptive, but it is still considered as a perpetuation of disinformation or the unintentional act of misinforming. By the same token, misinformation can be then weaponized into disinformation by actors or vendors who have ulterior motives, and we've seen that happen as well. So what we know here is that when it comes to information, it's not just this or that, right or wrong. There are subtleties in all of this. It's not just that it's fake or it's true. I mean, if you look at this list here, you can be scammed. There's scams. There is things that can be edited. They can be mostly false, mostly true, easily misattributed. We see all those quotes on Facebook that are misattributed to speakers and so forth. And the one that gets me mostly, I get tricked by because I think I'm very literal, is the satire. Sometimes I read the satire and I read it as the way it is, and I've been tripped up by that before. I'm a little bit more savvy, but sometimes I miss those things. So it's not just that it's right or wrong or that it's fake or true. There are subtleties in there, which makes it a lot more difficult for us to assess it for its validity. But let's talk about social media, which is always interesting. This is where stories, good and bad, can circulate freely, really unpoliced. And what did I hear the other day? That Facebook is where friendships go to die? I don't know. I lost a few, just saying. But almost all millennials and 3/4 of Gen Xers. How many millennials? I'm not a millennial. Millennial? Gen Xers? Oh, you guys are, you're those guys. You and I are on the cusp between Gen X and baby boomers.
We're kind of lost in space.
I think of us as agile. Anyway, so almost 50% of baby boomers are active social media users now. So that's a growing part of this. But in 2005, the Pew Research Institute conducted a study and found that less than 5% of American adults were on social media. Now, fast forward 10 years later, by 2015, 65% of American adults were on social media. So it's growing. People spend on average about 3 hours per day on social media. Guilty. And social media has become the virtual living rooms of our lives. This is where disinformation can be mobilized through social media channels and how it easily attracts our attention and inserts itself into our daily lives. So just a bit of a segue here, and I want to reflect on our Canadian roots. 1921 represented a tipping point in Canada, and I'm sure you're all familiar with it. At that point, and the timing was similar in the US, I think, as of 1921, there were officially more people living in urban areas than rural areas in Canada. And we know how that changed our society in Canada. We went from being very agriculturally driven and dominated from a where people live perspective to being more urban. And we know that how that's changed how agriculture has been conducted over the last several decades. But 100 years later represents a little bit of a different kind of tipping point. As of last year, the number of people using social media tipped over the 50% mark based on world population. With the world population projected to grow to well over 8 billion people as of 2025. In fact, they say today, United Nations said today was the day that it tipped to 8 billion people, so we're beyond that now. It's expected there's going to be more than 4.5 billion users on social media, so 55% of the world's population, and this number is only expected to grow over time. Social media has embedded itself in our global communication culture, and social media channels may shift and change. Apps and platforms may come and go, but social media has fundamentally changed how we interact and connect as human beings. So, speaking of human beings, I love them. They are my favorite animal. But we have some really quirky habits, and I'd like to point out how those habits interplay with our evolving communication and information environment. We humans are risk-averse story seekers. We are herd animals, and we are prone to fall into the traps of any one of a number of biases, and there's about 200 of them out there. For example, we seek out information that confirms our biases. If by chance we are faced with information that shakes the ground beneath the sacred cows of our beliefs, we're more apt to ignore it and return to information that confirms our biases or worldview. No one is resistant to this. This is how we are. We resist breaking ranks with our social networks because safety in numbers, right? This is about survival. This is how we have survived as a species, is because we've collected together in villages and worked together. That's how we survive. But today, survival looks different. We're not fighting the same way we did thousands of years ago. Today, we have to socially survive. And we are still compelled to follow the herd, so we still have those innate behavioral habits that we have, but the herd operates a little bit differently now. We're corralled virtually within echo chambers of our social media platforms, so just a little bit different. In a mass information world, we face decision fatigue because we're inundated with so much information every day. We make bad choices because we have no time for critical thinking, and it's not something we are built for. We don't take that time to think critically about things. It's just easier for us as human beings to take those cognitive leaps when we experience information overload, because the bad stuff is always easier to believe, always. Another interesting habit lies in our normative conception of information. We tend to view all information as consistently accurate, true, complete, and current without considering the validity of or impacts for any of those claims that are made. Now, I'm talking about our base being as humans. I'm not, I know we all think we can resist all of it, but there is this base of who we are as human beings and as animals and how we behave that drives us in these behavioral directions. But here's some data. 2.5 quintillion bytes of data are created every day. And I didn't know what quintillion was. I had to look it up. It's 18 zeros. That's a lot of data. And almost 5 billion views on YouTube are watched every day. And every 24 hours, 500 million tweets are published on Twitter. So that just gives us, we're dealing with a lot. There's a lot out there. Here's the thing. We're all connected to or invested in farming and food production. Everybody in this room is. And we know how Mother Nature works, right? She despises blank spaces. So, if you clear some ground, there's going to be the weeds are going to come up. We got a weed between our lettuce, the lines of lettuce in our garden. Weeds will happen. And she'll insert disease or pests or whatever. Human nature is not any different. Our brains despise vacuums or blank spaces. And if we have questions, concerns, or uncertainties, and we don't have information to address them, we will seek out information to fill those spaces. It's kind of how we work. And there are many out there that are willing to fill those gaps with less than accurate information. We know that. So every day, each one of us absorbs probably about 105,000 words through digital means. That's on average. And the ratio between what we can absorb and the amount of information that we put out, that is put out there, is really small. So our attention is one of those limited resources, right? We've got short attention spans. So time is a limited resource as well, meaning we have to pick and choose what information we take in, and we don't always choose wisely. So when we face uncertainty, whatever it is, we will simplify the world or a situation in order to navigate it in real time, right now. Like, crisis happens, how do I manage this? Our minds will filter what our eyes see through our previous life experiences and through how we identify. And these factors are kind of up here right now. And to top it all off, we will likely remember what we saw much differently after the fact. This is why when there is a car accident or, a crime scene, the police will get different versions, because somewhere amongst that, if they talk to all of them, they'll get some sense of what really happened. Because everybody will, even though they might have all seen it, they had different perspectives and different remembrances of it. But our perceptual frameworks are shaped by factors like these, and as a result, and our ability to assess risk, real risk, is really poor. We don't do it very well. And our reasoning takes shortcuts, and we are distracted by these kind of factors that we have, the lives we've lived, that filter what we see and what we experience in real time. And everybody's factors, these are called heuristics in social science, but these factors are unique for everybody. Everybody has a different set, because everybody lives differently, has had a different set of life experiences. And things are more complicated these days in terms of technological advancement in ag, in particular. I mean, science and technology are really outpacing our ability to keep up. I don't care how much you know agriculture. I'm always surprised every day about what's coming up next from a science and technology perspective. But what this does to us is it impacts our conversations. Every person we meet, neighbor, family member, friend, critic, activists, has a different set of these heuristics or these factors that influence them. And this is where we can run into problems. So a few years ago, colleagues and I, it was Monsanto at the time, became really interested in better understanding collectively how mis and disinformation, public perceptions, social media, all of this impacts lives, economy, and societies, particularly as it relates to agriculture. So these interests really led us to research and publish a study on the topic of disinformation. We wanted to better understand the historical landscape of disinformation in agriculture so that we might better project what may happen going forward with other issues. We thought that was important. We wanted to map it, to understand it. And we used the case of GMOs, genetically modified organisms, as a way to explore disinformation over time. And I'm gonna, if you'll indulge me, I'm just gonna share some of the outcomes of this peer-reviewed work. So we gathered almost 100,000 data points. These are unique URLs or online articles about GMOs that were posted between 2009 and 2019. We analyzed how often they were shared and by whom. And those are depicted here in the graph. What made GMOs such an interesting case study was that it has really followed a storyline. So you can see what we got going on here. You can see the story progresses over time. You've got a calm beginning, tension builds in the middle, and then it comes to an end. Now, I'm simplifying things a little bit here because there are other factors involved in this whole meta-narrative. There's the advent of social media and the adoption of it. There's various activist involvement and market signals. But we do see a downturn in the narrative arc by 2016 where the public and critics of agriculture have turned their attention to other things. What do you think they were? Sorry? Politics and pesticides. So this was we noticed a shift with Super Tuesday, and everything went towards Trump. And remember how I said attention is limited resource, and whoever wants to capture the clicks is going to go to where they can get the most attention. And Trump generated a lot of interest, like, let's be real. So we wanted to see in this story how particular events and political movements affected the sharing of these articles and information. So we discovered a couple of key drivers or contributors to the GMO conversation. One was traditional activism. And so this was like public demonstrations like the annual March Against Monsanto, which Trish knows very much a lot about. Another issues management thing. And then we also mapped on there some legislative measures. And these are bills and ballots in California's Prop 37 and the mandatory labeling of genetically engineered food. What we found was that, this is the interesting finding from this, what we found was when it came to the public demonstrations and related events, sharing of information about GMOs increased sharply immediately after. Got a lot of attention. But on the other hand, with the legislative measures, like the ballots and so forth, sharing of information trended downwards. And this was likely because most of those initiatives were defeated. So no one cared, no one was interested. If it didn't cause a little bit of a stir and it wasn't bad news, they didn't want to have anything to do with it. Again, it's down to attention, right? So this is one study about one narrative, GMOs, but we obtained some interesting insights that relate to the problem of disinformation in agriculture more broadly. Disinformation is used to attract attention by those who can gain from it. Disinformation influences public opinion and risk perceptions, and this in turn results in policies based on disinformation rather than scientific evidence. Disinformation is firmly planted in the attention economy, and it is a competitive economy where human attention is a scarce resource, and disinformation has been used to problematize science, affecting social license to operate across the entire agricultural value chain. So no one's immune. And disinformation is a product with a market, and we have to start thinking about it that way. So I don't need to really make a case for why we should care, because you already know, but the reality is that the world that we live and work in and grow food for has changed. It's really changed. Most of us are generationally and geographically removed from the farm, and that kind of distance creates those gaps, blank spaces. And then there's people that are opportunistic and will fill them. We live in a world where everybody can brand. Everyone has a soapbox. Anybody can be a citizen journalist or a citizen scientist. It doesn't matter if you have expertise or not. It's all about perceptions. All about perceptions. Actors or activists with ulterior motives take advantage of gaps in our information or data, and they plant the disinformation weeds before we can plant the good quality information seeds. I like using metaphors. Disinformation and those that create and share it don't have to be accountable. We know that. So the disinformation product can be mobilized quickly, and it is much more readily discoverable, whereas accurate scientific information is less so. And no matter what the issue is, rest assured, many of those disinformation vendors are the same, and they generally use the same playbook. So in this paper, we have a list of these disinformation vendors, and you will recognize these vendors in other issues across the board. Pesticides, they cut across all of those issues. So they're the same. Their job is disinformation. They don't care about agriculture. They don't care who eats. Their job is to get the disinformation out, to get the clicks, all that. So from an ag standpoint, we do know that this causes us problems, right? From the products and technology that do offer sustainable options for farming and food production are at risk. They're at risk. And livelihoods are at risk. It's a problem. So we know that communications are necessary, and we have to continue to do that, but it's not enough because disinformation vendors are aggressive. Branding is job one. Accuracy is absolutely irrelevant, and getting and sustaining attention is the priority. It's job one. Disinformation will always outperform facts. We know that because the bad stuff is always easier to believe. And then the problem with all of this is disinformation kind of becomes de facto consensus for societies because we see it over and over and over again, and it just implants in our brain. And once it's stuck in there, no amount of information is going to unstick it. If you think about the term frankenfood, I don't know, it came out 30 years ago, it's still there. And think about why it sticks. You don't even have to see a picture with it. You just create a picture in your mind, you know? So even syringes and tomatoes, like the whole thing, it's just always there. Enduring images. So we can no longer presume to hold the higher ethical ground in our conversations, no matter how accurate we are, because everything is about perceptions. Does size matter? Yeah, it does, but again, depends on how you're looking at things. If you're looking at things like this, you'll go, yeah, I want the one on the left, man. Bring it on. But if you're just looking at the numbers, maybe you don't quite get it because you don't have all the information there. So where are our opportunities? Well, critical thinking, slowing our thinking down and thinking about what's going on, being a little bit more analytic, I think is very helpful. It's good if we model it, but also we find ways to encourage it in our networks and with the people that we have conversations with. We need to, in this industry, to continue to have meaningful conversations with people about food and food production. We need to talk about why we do what we do and why we love it and why it matters, right here. And we need to invite others to the table in meaningful and equitable ways. And sometimes those people, we have to be willing to take some risks with some of them, with some groups, some people, and just lean into that discomfort a little bit. But I think the cross-fertilization of ideas and communities are invaluable because our most complex social, economic, cultural problems are really never solved in silos. They can't be done, that can't be done anymore. So we have to cultivate collections. Or connections. So 3 things. I'm going to conclude this quite quickly. Where am I at? Oh, I'm doing good. Okay, if we can't measure it, we can't manage it. There is a ton of data out there on about social media platforms like Twitter, and as a result, there is a rise in digital science research in this area. We got to stay on top of it and check and see what's happening, because we could benefit from that. Mis and disinformation in particular is identified as a broader social and economic problem area, and I'm really heartened by a statement from one of the lead digital scientists in this area, who stated a few months ago that all digital science scholars and practitioners need to be part of the solutions for these problems out there because we were part of creating the problem. And what this means for us in agriculture is the same thing. Like, we're part of the solution. So we need to be in there and engaging in these spaces and understanding what can we always do better, because we should always do better. It's better for the farm, right? So number 2, as tools for analyzing this kind of data become more user-friendly, more widely known and understood, we're going to see a shift in organizational structures in businesses. We will be more explicitly addressing these issues through job roles and more directed strategies. I gave a talk 10 years ago at 10 or 12, I don't know, it was a long time ago, at an industry conference in Canada, and I just said, I predict within 4 years that every organization that's represented here will have at least a part-time person working on social media, and they all poo-pooed me and told me I was full of it, and I wasn't wrong. So what happens is things become more familiar and part of things, and we've got this data set, then that creates those job roles where you have people in the organization actually examining this. It becomes part of issues management. It becomes part of feeding into communications and engagement and stakeholder engagement. So it will come with a job title. I predict that. Anyway, we'll see. I'll buy a beer for everybody if I'm wrong. But what this means is a mental shift as well as an organizational one. And what I'm kind of inviting you to do today is, if you haven't already, is to kind of make that mental shift. understand that we're all connected in the same social space, that social media space. Understand that even if we are not, don't like social media, aren't invested in, don't spend any time in it, we are all indirect consumers of it in the attention economy. And if we're not doing it, our friends are out there, it's just there. We need to accept that disinformation is a ubiquitous commodity that is traded in the world that we live and work in. And these narratives, the good, the bad, the ugly, affect our license to operate in this industry. Mis and disinformation are collectively key social and industry problems that we need to find ways to anticipate better. And because there are opportunities to connect and solve issues. There are opportunities to cross-fertilize. And the health of our industry and our planet and its people really depends on it. So that's it.